Good afternoon, everyone. Now we have my friend Julien Phalip, who is from San Francisco, and he'll be talking about advanced techniques for web functional testing. Julien.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for coming today. I'm going to start just very briefly. I don't want to bore you with that. Just a couple of facts about me so you know why I'm here today. I've been happily programming with Python as my main language for a number of years. I am also a Django core committer, and I occasionally tweet from this handle if you're ever interested in what I have to say. I work at Neuron. We are a web agency with a few offices scattered around the world. I'm personally based in San Francisco, but we also have an office here in Montreal. And we do really cool work. I really encourage you to check out our website or come and see me after the talk if you'd like to learn more about us. OK, so starting with a few definitions, just so we are clear on what I'm going to be talking about. When we talk about unit testing, it is to ensure that small parts of our code each work in isolation. Integration testing is about ensuring that some of those parts, when combined together, keep working well. And then functional testing is one step beyond. It's when you want to make sure that your application as a whole functions well, in particular from a user's perspective. And when we deal with functional testing for the web, typically it comes down to using browser automators. Now, why would be using browser automators? First, because it brings us closer to a real web user environment. All the media and static files, such as CSS, images, etc., they automatically get loaded by the browser. You don't have to worry about any of that. And similarly, any JavaScript code, any AJAX calls implicitly get executed by the browser. And then when all that is put together, then it allows you to test user interactions, browser compatibility, and very importantly, it's a lot of fun. Now, most likely the most popular web browser automator out there these days is Selenium. I was actually curious today who of you have ever used Selenium, if you could raise your hand. Wow, that's clearly the majority. That's exciting. And I really hope that as you walk out of this talk, you actually learn a lot of new tricks. So Selenium, very briefly, implements the WebDriver API, which is about to become a W3C standard, and is currently in draft. It works across multiple browsers, for example, Firefox, Chrome, IE, Safari, and Opera. It has client libraries in various languages, in particular Python. That's what we're interested in. And it's very easy to install. You just run pip install Selenium, and off you go. So for those of you who do not know about Selenium, I thought I'd just give a very quick demo, just to get an idea of the kinds of things that you can do with it. So here I'm just going to run a subset of the Django admin test suite, which is written with Selenium. I'm going to be holding my hands up, so you know that it's automated. I'm not going to do anything. Everything's going to be running by itself. What's going to happen is that you will see an instance of Firefox that will open, and then a bunch of user action being executed in an automated way. So here you see Firefox is running a bunch of user action. It's all going very fast. Here, typically, we're using Selenium in Django, mostly to test the functionality. So that means form submissions and JavaScript, any little JavaScript tidbits that help improve the experience in the Django admin. So we just want to have some tests to make sure that as we keep adding more code to JavaScript, or even in the Python code sometimes, just make sure that everything keeps working, that there are no regression over time. So that's it. Just to give you an idea of the kinds of stuff that you can do with Selenium. Now, then I thought I'd show a few things that may not necessarily be obvious when you start using Selenium. if you, for example, you've created responsive websites, which responsiveness is something that's become really popular in the last couple of years, and for good reasons, because with a single code base, you can display content optimally for various screen sizes, for example, for mobile or desktop or tablet. Now, testing your website with Selenium is actually really, really simple. It all comes down to using that one method, which comes in the WebDriver API, set window size, which allows you to, at any point in time during your test, to resize the browser window. And then, for example, you may start with a 600 pixel width, run some tests, make sure everything works for mobile, and then expand the window size to then run some tests to make sure that it all works on desktop. And I just had a very simple demo here again. To do that, I actually used the PyCon website, which I'm sure you've all used and interacted with. I'm just currently running it locally. It actually happens to be a Django site too. And if you look here at the top, for example, there's a menu which you can expand. It's very traditional kind of interaction. And if you resize the browser, that menu will hide behind that icon here, and then you can expand it, and then again interact with the same menu. So I wrote a very simple test to make sure that this works fine. And again, opening automatically, hands up, automatically opening the browser, opening each of those menus, and then resizing the window using that method and checking that menu works also on mobile. So it's very straightforward, something that just may not be totally obvious once you start using Selenium. So that was a very quick demo. Now, something that's I think is very, very cool is that you can also test not only the functionality, so your JavaScript, etc. You can also test the visuals, so your CSS, images, etc. Anything that would be visually rendered on your page, and that can be done with a nifty little app that's called Needle. It's available on GitHub. It was started by Ben Firschman, and it's an app that I help maintain. It's based on Selenium, and it will catch any regressions in the display of your site by, for example, that might be your styles or your CSS, typography, SVG, images, basically anything that would be visually represented on your site. And it will do that by actually taking screenshots and comparing screenshots over time. And if it spots any differences between the screenshots, then it will fail with a standard test failure. So just to give you a very quick example, it's extremely simple to use. Again, I'm going to use the PyCon website as an example. Here, I'm interested in that nice little banner here. It has some cool graphics, some nice colors, and it also has some text in it. So how would we go about writing some tests to make sure that this visual keeps looking the same over time as we keep making changes in our CSS? Just make sure we never introduce any regressions. And all it takes is that really that one method, assert screenshot, which is provided by Needle. So what it does, that screenshot, assert screenshot method accepts two parameters. The first one is a CSS selector to the element on your page that you want to target and take a screenshot of. The second parameter is just the file name that's going to be stored, the PNG file screenshot is going to be stored on your disk. And the very first time you're going to run this test, you're going to pass it a flag, which is going to instruct Needle to actually save a baseline copy of the screenshot. And every subsequent times that you run the test, for example, on CI server, you will run this test without that flag. What it's going to do is that it's going to take a new screenshot and compare it with the baseline image that you've previously created. So I'm going to give you a quick example again. So it's the very first time I'm going to forgot to clear. Okay. So the very first time that I'm running this, so I'm going to pass it that flag, save baseline. So it's going to run that code that I've just showed you. I'm going to make this a little bigger, maybe, if you can see. Okay. So running a test. So now you see it opens Firefox, loads the site, takes a screenshot, all very fast. Now if we take a look here, it's created a folder with that one screenshot. So it's all well and good so far, not particularly useful. I'm just going to run the test again now without this flag. What's going to happen now is that, again, it's going to do exactly the same thing. It's going to open the page, take a screenshot, compare it with the baseline that previously created, didn't detect any differences, so the test passed. Now, let's go into the code and insert a mistake. I'm just going to change here, accidentally, the color of the blue sky, and in a very subtle way here, instead of 5, I'm just going to put a 0. If I reload the page here, it's really hard to see that anything changed. If you just look at it, it pretty much looks the same. Very easy to miss that we've inserted that typo in the CSS. But this is where Needle comes to the rescue. So here I'm going to rerun that same test. Same thing, opens the browser, takes a screenshot, compares it with the baseline, and this time the test failed. If we go back up, we see the error message, so the new screenshot, blah, 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 didn't match the baseline. But it doesn't just stop there. It will actually also create a diff file between the new screenshot and the baseline to actually highlight what actually went wrong, where are the differences. So here it created a new file, banner.diff, the PNG, and here it actually highlights what's basically different between the baseline and the new screenshot. So here, it's obvious that there's something wrong with the sky and the color. So here I'm going to go back here and undo my mistake, rerun the test, and now the test passed. Another very common mistake when dealing with CSS is when messing up font sizes. So here again, another example. I'm going to change the font size for some of the text in that banner. And then rerun that test. And here again, the test failed. If we look again, now that diff highlights the text that actually changed within that banner. So it's extremely simple to use, and it's really, really powerful. Oh, actually, so now just to show you again, if I undo my mistake here and I put it back to what it used to be and rerun the test, then now we're back on track. OK, so moving on. Just want to give a few tips about Needle. The baseline screenshots actually act as fixtures for your test suite. So you typically want to store them in your repository so that they are shared with the rest of your team and the CI server so that everybody can run the test against those baseline screenshots. It's also extremely important to ensure the consistency between different environments. If the CI server uses a different browser version or has different system fonts installed, for example, the page may not render exactly the same. So you want to be very careful that all environments actually use the same, and that can be done using configuration management systems like Chef, Ansible, Puppet, or Salt. Then I wanted to touch on the topic of continuous integration and how to use all this stuff in a real workflow. So when you're going to be running a CI server, typically that server is not going to be using a physical monitor. So instead, you want to run your test in headless mode, which means basically using a virtual display. Very simple to do on your CI server. You want to install a browser, or if possible, a very specific version of a browser. You want to install system fonts, anything you need to make sure that consistency between your environment. And then you want to install XVBF, which is a program that will run a virtual display in memory. Then it's very simple to use. You can run the XVBF command and then assign a number for that display that's then going to be used by your browser. If you use Jenkins, you can also use an XVBF plugin that's basically going to run those two things for you automatically. for every time the tests are run. If you use Travis, it's also very simple to use. Just run those commands before your tests actually start. You can also use PyVirtualDisplay, which is a nice little package, which will allow, it's basically a wrapper around XVBF, and it will allow you to start and stop that virtual display using Python code. Or you may also use Phantom.js, which is a headless browser, and it's going to deal with its own virtual display. It's also super easy to use. Selenium ships an interface to that browser, so it's very easy to get started with. So I wanted to show a very cool service that is called Sauce Labs. What Sauce Labs does, it actually runs remotely in the cloud. It has a whole bunch of different VMs. And what's really nice is that it actually gives access to multiple different browsers. It's like IE, Firefox, pretty much any browser that you can think of, even including mobile browsers. And that saves you the trouble of managing your own set of different environments, different browsers locally. It also allows to run tests in parallel. And something that's really useful, it also keeps video recordings of all the sessions that you run. It's particularly useful when tests actually fail. So you can go back at a point in time and look at the video to see where tests actually failed. So here again, I'm going to show a demo. I'm going to run some of the Django tests that I showed earlier. Only this time, remotely on the Sauce Lab platform. I just realized that I actually have to restart a server here. Just bear with me for a second. Here, what I'm doing basically is to create the initial connection with the Sauce Lab server. Just make sure everything is authenticated. OK. So now I'm going to rerun those tests. OK, so now I'm going to go to the Sauce Lab website, refresh. So now you see that some tests are currently being run. You can actually see them in real time. So you can see the tests that are run as I speak in the platform. And so that was a very quick one. And the cool thing is that, again, it kept a video recording of that test. So at any point in time, you can go back and then view the video. In this particular instance, I'm running those Django tests on, I think, Firefox on a Linux machine. Yeah. And that same test, which I've been running on, I think, IE8. Yes, let's try. Yeah, so that's IE8 on a Windows XP machine. Again, that's just currently being run. So you can just view the video. So what I've been currently integrating the Django test suite with Sauce Labs, because they were kind enough to actually provide us an account for open source projects. And so we're just now in the process of integrating the whole test suite. So it's going to be very useful to make sure that the Django admin keeps working in all different kinds of browsers. OK. So yeah, I encourage you to check them out. It's very handy, especially if you don't want to have to deal with the trouble of dealing with all those environments yourself. I thought I'd also touch on a topic that's a bit controversial in Selenium. Selenium is often criticized for its slowness and flakiness. Really, there should be an entire talk dedicated to this. There are solutions for just about everything, but it does require some effort. I just thought I would provide a few quick tips. First of all, if you're really concerned about speed, I encourage you to use Phantom.js because it's much more lightweight than Firefox, and it will run much faster. I also encourage you to use parallelization. Actually, I actually can show you an example here. I'm going to run some tests, so I'm going to stop the SOSLAD test here. Here I'm going to run some of the tests that I showed you earlier, only in just multiple processes at a time. That's a feature that's provided by the nose test runners. Other test runners also have this kind of functionality. What you're going to see here is multiple versions, instances of Firefox running at the same time, and each running a different test. So that's going to really speed up the execution time of your test. And so again, very easy to use. Now, if you're concerned about robustness, I can't emphasize this enough, but it's really, really important to pin down the versions of your whole software stack. There are so much stuff happening when you run functional tests because it exercises so many layers of your software stack. It's really important that everybody on your team and on CI server is using exactly the same versions. Otherwise, any subtle differences between two versions of the software may cause your website to behave or look slightly differently and then cause false positives in your test suite. Extremely important. Also, you want to master the use of explicit weights. It's a very common source of mistakes when writing Selenium tests. A very common mistake is actually to run your test too fast before the state in the browser is ready for those tests to be run. So you want to make sure, for example, if you have very long AJAX calls being run, you want to have ways of tracking that the web app is at a stage where you can continue running your test. And the WebDriver API gives you that kind of functionality to test for particular condition for you to wait on and then resume your test. That already goes a long way into increasing the robustness of your test, but it does require to be methodical and meticulous. And there are a lot more tips that I don't have time to cover today, but I encourage you to check out those two books, which are both really useful. I'll share the links in this, when I publish the slides later on. Those are really full of really good tips for increasing the efficiency of your test. So in conclusion, I just want to give a word of caution. Integration and functional tests are slow. That's an obvious fact. So use them with moderation. You should also only use Selenium for what a dummy test client may not already achieve. So focus your Selenium test on complex user workflows, for example, or visuals, and let the dummy client take care of everything else, because it's going to be much faster, much more reliable. And finally, integration and functional tests are important. I really encourage you to include some in your test suite because they will increase your confidence in your code greatly. They will increase your test coverage. They will increase, they will allow you to test the integration between your front end and your back end, ensure that the user interface works and looks as expected. And again, it's a lot of fun to use them, so if you've never used it, I really encourage you to use those tools, because at the very least, you're just going to have a lot of fun. So thanks very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Since we have time for question and answers, do you have any questions for Julien?
So just one very quick question. You mentioned Phantom.js for headless testing, of course, given that JavaScript tends to work very differently in different browsers. Have you got any suggestions for headless versions of other browsers like Firefox or IE?
Well, typically, when using a headless mode, I would use a virtual display, so I would still use the same engine, if possible. As far as Phantom.js is concerned, I'm actually really impressed by how robust and efficient it is. It's pretty much on par with Firefox and Chrome in terms of functionality, at least as far as I've been testing it. And it's something that I actually use very confidently with my test. I really recommend you to check it out. Super easy to install and super easy to use.
Hi, thanks very much for the talk. I learned a lot. So just a tiny little thing, really. In case you didn't know it, there's a command that comes with the latest versions of XVFB called xvfb-run, which will just run the next command you put in bash in a virtual frame buffer. And it's really useful even on your own machine if you're running Selenium tests, that they'll be in a virtual frame buffer so they're not popping up and annoying you while you're trying to do something else. So xvfb-run.
Cool, thanks.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I thought it was really interesting. I just was wondering if you could comment on how you decide what to test. Like, would you test the basic path through your app or edge cases more?
So, I mean, it's a common problem you have with tests in general. You could spend your days, writing tests, and that's all good, but you really want to think about what's really critical, what's really important, what really makes sense, and it really differs from website to website, web apps to web apps. If you have, for example, an app that it's extremely crucial that something looks pixel perfect, otherwise your app won't make any sense, then this is something that would definitely make sense to put. You want to put some effort into using, Selenium, for example. If it's not that important the way it looks, if it breaks a little, it's no big deal, then don't worry about Selenium. And again, Selenium should be kind of your last resort. Always think, how can I achieve this test using something like a dummy test client? If I can, then don't even look at Selenium. Only use Selenium for what you couldn't test with anything else, and for something that's really important for you and your app.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Is there any way to evaluate what code has been executed on your environment?
Yes, you can use the coverage package, which will basically list every line of code in your entire stack that's been executed during the test. And that definitely works with Selenium.
So it applies in the same process?
Yeah, if it is in the same process, that's right. So if everything runs in multiple threads within the same process, it would work. Not if it's running multiple processes. That's a good point.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. How does Sauce Labs or even Selenium handle the data-driven website? So for example, if you need, there's some sort of an AJAX query that gets the database value from there, from the data, and then matches it against it. So how does it handle that? Does it generate the values by itself, or do you have to provide those values, or does there need to be a database connection for that?
So as far as I understand, the processing actually happens. So any custom code, any database-related code will run locally. So say on your CI server or on your own laptop. Sauce Lab will just only take care of the rendering and executing of whatever JavaScript inside that VM. But then it will still communicate with your local app as far as data is concerned, for example.
So that means database needs to be accessible for Sauce Labs in order to be able to do that?
No, as far as I'm concerned, that only needs to be, that will only be executed on your machine, and then it will just send basically the HTML and the resulting, the result of your app will be then sent over to Sauce Lab, and that will be rendered. So Sauce Lab only takes care of the client side, basically.
I see. Thanks.
They have like, if you're running servers locally, they have a little encrypted tunnel that they'll put between your machine. So you run a little proxy server on your machine,
yeah,
and then it'll tunnel over to the Sauce Lab server so they can look at anything you've got running locally or on your own network.
That's right. This is the thing that I was running that took a minute to get started earlier.
How would you use Needle with multiple different browsers if you're trying to do visual testing in Internet Explorer, say, 6, because you want to kill yourself?
Yeah. It's very easy, actually. You just need to use a different, it's up to you. There are two cases, I'd say. If you really care that both browsers, say Firefox and IE6, would render a particular component of your page exactly the same, then you want to test against the same baseline image. If you acknowledge that there might be differences, they're not so important, but you do want to make sure that it keeps working the same in IE, keeps working the same in Firefox, then just create two different sets of baseline images. So you can, maybe have a class that will inherit from your, say, an IE test class that will inherit from Firefox. You run exactly the same test, except you switch the WebDriver, and you just give different file names so they don't conflict.
Thanks.
All right. Any more questions? Well, thanks for the talk, Julian.
Thank you.
Give a big applause. Thank you.